So I owe the genesis of this whole series of ramblings to J.M. Berger's in chapter 76, I think, or section 76. This book, Experience and Conceptual Activity, a philosophical essay based upon the writings of A.N. Whitehead. And in that chapter, he talks about our experience as playful, and that the birth of life itself from the inorganic world was essentially uh, a playful expression of sufficiently excited matter, such that it created a whirlpool or an emergent system, still dependent on what we call the inorganic material world. I mean, you can't have an organism in a vacuum. It'll suffocate and die. It'll explode because there's no air pressure. I mean, organisms are always in an environment, and really, there is no system called organism without the environment within which it takes place. So, this playful metaphor for what consciousness is, or experience is, or cognition is different from the normal one that we use, that is more of the mainstream classical scientific approach. And that approach is based on the metaphor of a computer, that consciousness, or actually the brain, the consciousness is like the software that's programmed by, our base instincts, or that's the motivation from the inside, but we process information already existing out there in the world to inform us about what we ought to do, because it's true, independently of whatever our brain is computing. In other words, this understanding of our experience, or of the brain, because it assumes that experience is the brain, is based on the idea that our brains are basically representing a pre-given environment. So in other words, there is information out there. It exists as information, independent of any subjects or organisms that are living in it. So what does this imply? Well, what is information? Well, these traditional classical scientists would define information as digits, or bits, ones and zeros, which are basically responses to questions that we ask, or experiments that we perform that give us a yes or no answer, or a true or false answer. You know, looking at a container of hydrogen gas that's just been shot in from the right side of the container. Prior it was a vacuum. We can know that statistically, probabilistically, within a certain time frame, half of that hydrogen will be on one side of the container and half will be on the other. It will have reached a state of complete disorder, at least within the container that it exists. So we can have information in this sense about certain extreme conditions or laboratory conditions in the state of nature. So we can have this very reductionistic understanding of information as just a fact about the world. But see, the problem is, even to derive these digits or these bits of information, we have to ask a question. They're not just given. That's precisely why there's this hard problem of consciousness, because from the scientific understanding of the material world, or physical reality, or what we assume in the traditional classical paradigm, is that the world is out there, and it exists independently of us, and we're just a derivative of it, which, it's not that I would want to deny that, just as I wouldn't want to, deny the fact that the organism, as its own emergent system, autonomous system, is dependent upon its environment for the air that it breathes, for the perturbations that characterize its experience, for the energy of food that we take in and pass through us. We are dependent on what we are immersed in. It's just that taking the information processing view, that we're just programmed by a pre-existing exterior world made basically of bits, or of mathematics. It's an extreme form of Platonism, really, or at least a certain interpretation of what Plato was saying, that the forms, or the mathematical symbols or geometric shapes, or whatever the fundamental eternal components of reality are, exist independently of any perceiver or mind. But see, not necessarily. I mean, this is why there's different interpretations of Plato. You can understand, maybe his most famous work, about the trial of Socrates, in the sense that only death can reveal these forms to us, whatever they happen to be, while we talk about them in this world, during this life. Because, we talk about experience as though it doesn't have to reconcile itself with the fact that we are born and will die. We think we're just this slice of me-ness that exists now, independently of its past, its future, and its environment. See, this is sort of what our experience becomes when we talk ourselves into the information processing metaphor. We become a me that exists cut off from its surroundings, that only gets information through the senses. Emotion is something I attribute to you because I decided to think you were feeling that way. In other words, I have to abstract from my presence before you and with you in order to respond to it truthfully, unless I think and somehow define what you are based on measurably provable facts, like things I can pin on you, accuse you of, that you can't talk yourself out of. And see, we're confounding, or I'm confounding the difference here between the subjective and the objective, or and I'm confusing myself in the process. See, it's very contagious, this way of thinking, when you start trying to divide everything up and understand exactly what this part does and exactly what that part does, as though there were a this apart from a that, as though you could measure one without the influence or interference of the other, in any circumstance. But, when we do really take evolution into consideration as an aspect of experience, we can no longer assume that there are definite forms existing in this world independently of us. The forms which appear in our experience are always including us as the perceiver of the information, of the form, of the object in the world that isn't created by me or projected by me, but that to exist as it is requires me to participate in its coming to be, in its concrescence. And so thinking about experience in this way, we're essentially playing with the world around us. And what's unique about playing and about games is that you have to follow certain rules. So in a sense, you're determined by certain habits of behavior. But those habits are skills for bringing something new into existence, for having fun, by creating something unexpected. And you need both of these for evolution. You need a structure, a determinate form, and you need a creative ability. You need the presence of the future and the past to have a moment, to have experience.